as a thought process, as a concept, is an idea whose time had come decades back in the Western world. In India, it is very, very decent, I would say, in terms of its offering, in terms of its structuring, etc. Even as we speak, we have just two listed breeds in the country, whereas in the other parts of the world, it is in in a few thousands. Even when portfolio managers actually do their stock selection, when they actually have their portfolio, that portfolio universe itself, the qualifiers are north of 100, 150, 200 kind of REITs. So that effectively tells you that we are just a small tip of the iceberg as far as the REITs are concerned in India. And why, therefore, we thought is an appropriate time for us as an asset manager to capitalize on this opportunity for Indian investors who actually like real estate. But not everybody, or not everybody at every different points in time have the ready cash flow. Cash flow could be chunky in nature. It could be multiple things. And how is it humanly possible? Unless you're born with a golden spoon or you minted golden spoons as you grew your business, how is it possible for every individual investor, whether the lowest end of the radar or the highest end, to own real estate in every part of the world? And I think that is how the concept of REIT was really born in our mind, where we are actually telling the investor that what is this REIT? A REIT, I mean, in terms of definition, it's a real estate investment trust. But effectively, what a REIT does is either it owns a real estate, or it is operating that real estate on behalf of somebody, or it is actually, doing a financing activity, basically for some real estate which is actually generating income. So these are the various activities that the underlying REIT is doing. And you or me as an investor can actually have a slice of this REIT without you physically owning real estate in any part of the country or in your own country. So that, in a very, very simple terms, is what REIT is all about. And when we are talking about income generating asset, automatically we are talking about a cash flow. And when you are talking about a cash flow, it becomes fixed income. But when we talk about fixed income, we are interested only in the cash flows of the company. Yes, if the company grows, it's fantastic, etc. But there is no, apart from annuity, there is no other appreciation of that asset that you are actually looking forward to. But when we talk about REITs, you are actually talking about a case or a point where there is income generation as well as potential for capital appreciation, both bundled into one. And how does the appreciation happens? The appreciation actually happens because of the underlying property, which increases or decreases in value. So effectively, what you are getting when you are owning REITs is steady stream of cash flow, which is fixed income, and potential for capital gains, which is equity. So rightly so, we will place REIT in the midst of these two, which is fixed income and equities. And hence you see this, even though we have just two listed REITs in the country today, you named pretty much any retail investor or any institutional investor or an HNI, I would barely see any portfolio which does not own any of these REITs. So that is just to kind of draw a perspective into how these REITs are actually structured and why it does definitely make a case for ownership in your portfolio.
So Lakshmi, you want me to just give open that presentation, because we can have a Q&A after that. You want to give a quick perspective, some data points that will help?
Yes, you can. Yeah, if you can stop this, I'll probably share my own presentation.
You can go to the share and start. I think you can.
Okay.
That's available.
Let me try that. Yeah. So Tarun and the audience, this was the presentation which we had made during our NFO, which happened last month. But I think what is very important to note is that this part I already covered. I think this also is a very, very important part of the presentation. Again, this I had broadly touched upon, where the investor is actually investing in the REIT, which in turn is actually investing in real estate. So you are owning this part, the one which is looking cloud gray. You're actually owning that part. You're actually buying units in the REIT, and you're not really buying any real estate. And no REIT, at least when I talk about our strategy, I will tell you the fund that we are investing doesn't physically buy any real estate. They are buying purely REIT units. Diversification part I have already emphasized, but I think this is
Lakshmi,
the one.
Lakshmi, one issue, we can't
Yes.
see you. We can't see you in video. I think is your video hide or
No,
something?
my video's on. My video's on. My audio's on. I can see myself, so I'm pretty
Oh,
sure.
you can see yourself, but I think there is some hide maybe. Okay, go on, go on. I'll see what
Yeah,
happened.
there is a request for this deck sharing. So yes, this deck is available with Tarun. You will get it in your inbox once you share your
Yes.
email ID with Tarun. So, I started off saying that India has two listed REITs. Singapore has 1,000. Australia has, few hundreds. And, likewise, if you look at the entire universe put together, there are over 2-3,000 listed REITs. It could be, just 150, 200, which are relevant ones. It could be very small pockets, which may not be relevant. But broadly, there is a very massive universe which is available. Second and most important thing is that, if Amazon is going to lease out office spaces in Bangalore or in Mumbai or anywhere, then obviously, and that obviously the Indian, real estate owners are potential beneficiaries of that. And which is why if you see the left-hand side of this grid, India is dedicated to office spaces. But what about if Amazon actually wants to open up a robotic fulfillment center and they want to do their research and development activities? Will they do it in their office? Answer is no. They actually need to have, some sort of enrichment space which they lease out specifically for, their own research and development activities. What about Amazon, e-commerce, the way it is picking up? What about if Amazon wants to have more storage capacities, because somebody suddenly in Singapore is having like a burgeoning demand, somebody in Hong Kong is, creating that kind of this, so brick and mortar is gradually giving way to e-commerce. So what happens to warehouses? So the demand for warehouses from e-commerce giants like Amazon will go up. So that again is fulfilled by warehouse space being leased out. Now, all of this that you see over here, data centers, every company mandatory needs to have a data center because that's where they do all their storage of data, etc. Now, this and many more, so warehouses, logistics, office spaces is just one small element of the overall REIT ownership. There are so many, there is a car park, for example, it could be a residential area and that is being leased out. The car parks are being leased out. It could be a mall of which you're getting a rental income. Now, these could be commercial, but need not be office spaces. So I think this right-hand side seals the case as to why there is a very, very strong demand or a need for ownership of REITs, not just in India, but diversifying outside of India. The next question, which is very logical, that will come to investors' mind, यार outside India आपने बोल दिया, India के बाहर तो इतने सारे countries है, so many continents are there, which will you pick up? So again, there is a method in the madness as to how that choice is made into Asia Pacific REITs. So I think Asia Pacific region is one such reason where the dividend yield is very attractive. We started off saying that there is a steady stream of cash flows. So cash flow equal to yield. And in this case, in case of REIT, it is nothing but dividend yield. There is a real estate segment which is extremely organized. That is more theoretical because these are more advanced countries and there is a growth potential. So, for example, this portfolio manager that we have, signed up with for launch of this strategy, which is the Sumitomo Mitsui Asset Manager. They are Japan's 5th largest asset manager, and they are managing over $150 billion. So when we spoke to them and we asked them that what drives your investment decision? So the way we in India look at BMV, which is business management valuation, they also look at BMV. While they don't call it BMV, but yes, they said it's the business, the management quality, obviously valuations. We don't want to buy something very expensive. But apart from that, what really stands out is growth at a reasonable yield. So there is an aspiration, which is where this point comes in, strong growth potential. And the moment you talk about strong growth potential, some of the mature markets like US, UK, which is the Europe area, etc., they completely get knocked out because they may be having yield, but they may not be necessarily having a growth potential. So blending the two, they realize that Asia and within the Pacific region, it's Australia, that you have market where there is growth potential, which means the earnings can expand. And of course, there is a continuous yield potential, which also is very, very important from a REIT perspective. And this is the slide which actually shows you how the Asia Pacific region dividend yields are higher than the developed market dividend yields. So if you look at the spreads in countries like UK, it is 2.5%. If you look at places like Japan, where there is zero interest rates, yes, there is 4.5% kind of a dividend yield, but is there really growth available? Answer is maybe not, because Japan introduced REITs, or the concept of REITs were introduced in countries like US, UK, Japan back in the 60s to the 80s. In the parts of Asia, it is more like a 90s or a 2000s kind of a phenomena. So it's a 20-30-year history vis-a-vis a 50-60-year history, which is why the growth metrics are very, very different. If you look at the slide, and why we have taken, or why the 10-year benchmark is taken of these respective countries, because ultimately you will look at what is the risk-reward trade-off. I can buy a 10-year of a country and just sit on it forever or for 10 years because it's a sovereign risk. I don't have to worry. But contrary to that, if you actually buy the REIT of that country, look at the gap in dividend yield. The Singapore region offers you 80 basis points, or just 0.8% on the Singapore government bond, whereas the REITs out there offer you 4.7%. The gap, therefore, is 4%. And likewise, Hong Kong, where the yields available on REIT is close to 5.3, whereas the country is offering you just an yield of 0.3%. So I think these are one of those, therefore, those cherry picked countries or the regions which have actually made it to the portfolio list, depending on what are the dividend yields available and what is the gap between the yield of the REIT in that region, aggregate REIT, and obviously the underlying government security or government bond of that particular country. And needless to say, when you are evaluating any balance sheet, including a REIT balance sheet, what is important is to verify the financial soundness of those REITs. In Asia Pacific region, you will see most of them, the debt ratios in countries like Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia, etc., are quite low compared to countries like Japan and the US. Japan, US is all in the band of 50-55%, whereas countries like Hong Kong, UK, Australia are all in the band of 30 to 35. Now, if you see that with REITs in India, again, if you see Embassy REITs, right now after the Embassy Tech Village acquisition, their debt ratio would be closer to 26. They have a leeway to go up to 33 or 30, which is not considered very high leverage because you are issuing equity along with the units. So as you see, I am actually elucidating reasons for ownership of REITs, not just in India, but outside of India. First and most important reason is that you're not getting just office spaces, which is now like a big question mark kind of a thing. Will office spaces really survive post-COVID era? So that is number one. Number two is we are talking about the growth at a reasonable yield aspiration, which Asia as a geography has. And we showed you the gap between the yields of those nations vis-a-vis the REIT yields of those nations. And this is the third point, which is the leverage or the debt ratio. So I think these were the three most important considerations for us to offer a REIT in the Asia Pacific space, not necessarily in the developed market space. This again is this theory. All of you are aware what kind of growth drivers you are seeing discretionary spends, and I will share that more when I come in the outlook. This is again just to give you a flavor of different countries, how the consumer growth or the consumer spends are actually accelerating. And this is starting last year. So there is a trend which has been extrapolated. This has been tabled by Euromonitor. We have just produced the data as to how the expectation per consumer spending is likely to increase over the next 3 years. Urbanization again, no marks for guessing, as and when we see more rural to urban movement happening, whether it is in Shanghai or whether it is in Delhi, you will incrementally see necessity, more consumption, more office spaces, more real estate spaces. In general, the space is increasing. So again, this is more something for you to keep it on the back of your mind, that how there is a rapid growth, which is urbanization, which is also leading to growth in real estate. This is very, very important. And if the world is going to be driven, the financial world is being driven by fintech, then I would say the retail world is being driven by e-commerce. Now look at the trend of e-commerce right now. So we have a 2019 data, 2020 has just ended. But there again, Asia was, having significance. But the point is that even though Asia is a little under 50% of the total e-com space, this number is expected to burgeon much faster. And the expectation is that Asia will grow about 1.5 times more than what it is today over the next 3 to 4 years. This is a 5-year data starting 2019. So this orange part is the 2024 expectation by Euromonitor, which also solidifies our case and our reason why we are actually positioned in the Asia REITs, not developed market REITs or not just specific India REITs. And honestly, India REITs, if I were to create a portfolio today, I have just 2 stocks. There will be one more listing probably in the next 3 weeks. But how much more? I'll have 3, then I'll have maybe 10, maybe 15. But is that sufficient enough a universe for me to create a portfolio? The answer is probably not. So I think these are some of the very, very strong reasons why we have chosen to, and this again, I started off with this earlier, look at the introduction of REITs in very key countries. And that will give you the perspective when I talked about mature markets vis-a-vis developing or growth markets. In US and Netherlands, we saw REITs being introduced in early 60s, late 60s. In Canada, Belgium, again, developed worlds, it was in the early 90s. Whereas if you see countries like the Asian regions, it is more a late 90s or an early 2000 kind of a phenomenon. So as and when you are introducing a new asset class to that particular region, there is a growth potential because there are many more asset owners who actually seek to monetize via the REIT route. So REIT has proved a very, very beneficial way for real estate owners to actually monetize via listing their REITs with a basket of portfolio, which is very, very diversified. And I will take you through some of them when I actually go through some case studies. So this is the reason why we have chosen Asia over the rest of the world. And so this is just to give you a color on the REIT indices. Again, these are all past data, including 2020, but just to give you a color as to how the UK, which is right here, if you see the bottommost line that you see is the data from 2007 to 2020, how the UK chart has actually remained flat. And just above that is the US chart, which also has remained reasonably flattish. Hong Kong is, of course, a very key driver because it's been driven by Hong Kong and China region. Close on next is Singapore. And there is somewhere Australia, which is meddling between the two. But clearly, we are saying that major cities in Asia as a logistics hub is one of the key pointers why Asian REITs need to be owned. Now, 2020, we deferred the launch of our own REIT fund because we wanted to actually see how the COVID world will be different from a REIT standpoint. Now, everybody knows that I am sitting and still working from home. I'm sure quite a few of you would be having this interaction sitting from home. Some of you may be in offices. But the question which people asked us that, office spaces are giving way to residential work from home, hybrid models. In that, how will your REIT survive? And my answer to that is very simple. REIT is not equal to office. That is only true. That equation is only true when we are talking about India listings. And the moment you go outside of India, this portfolio that we are showing you is the SMAM REIT portfolio, the Asia Pacific REIT portfolio. And the one which you're seeing in orange is actually the REIT index against which the portfolio is benchmarked. Just look at office. I will start with office first because that's a pretty, I call it the compulsory question in a question paper, you know, when you're writing an exam. But look at the REIT office component in this. It's less than 4%. And in this less than 4%, 1% belongs to embassy. So India ownership is close to 1%. Look at hotels. It is zero right now. Most part through 2020, they were underweight, which has worked significantly. Not that benchmark has a very high component. Now they started cherry picking some in the hospitality, not necessarily hotels. Look at residence, it is zero. So what is really hogging limelight? It is the industrials, which are, as I gave you examples of what could be probably industrial areas. It could be, enrichment centers. It could be data centers. It could be specialty segments over here, which is infra properties, agri properties. All of these, mind you, are getting leased out. And diversified has got blended, you know, which cannot be clubbed into any of these. It could be part office, it could be part retail, it could be hybrid. All of that has got blended into this diversified. So what you are seeing in front of you is sort of, okay, I'm not saying this is cast in stone, but sort of a COVID proof portfolio. And again, the proof of the pudding is, if you see the December data, I don't have it here, it will come to you subsequently when the fact sheet reaches your inbox, but we already have received the data. The year to date, or the year 2020, the fund in question has actually delivered a positive return. That's not magic, you know. It has delivered a positive return because it has been consistently outperforming the benchmark over various points in time, including the COVID era. I will just show you that in a minute, and then I'll go back to the case studies, and then we can open up for Q&A. Now, again, this is data till November. The December data again has ended in the positive only, not in the negative. But if you have a look at this, you will realize that every year since the inception, the fund was launched in September 2011. Every year, the fund has consistently outperformed the benchmark. There have been cyclicalities, of course. You know, there was a period where suddenly there was a taper tantrum. So the fund gave low digit positive returns, though the returns were still positive. 2015 was a year of marginal negative return. Currency also plays an important role, which I will cover subsequently. But I would like to take you through this portfolio, which is a very diversified portfolio, spanning across logistics, data centers, fulfillment centers, companies like Japan Post, or for that matter, 3M. All of these are marquee tenants. For Amazon has been, for example, a tenant for Goodman Group since 2003, for example. So I'm saying these are all very diversified portfolio. 48.8% or 48 as of December end on Singapore looks obnoxiously high from a geographical perspective. But as you drill down, you will realize that Singapore is actually the hub for Asia listing, Asia REIT listing. And that is the reason you see so many of them actually listed in Singapore. Let's take the top holding. As of November end, this was the top holding. As of December, the portfolio that we've just got, Goodman has actually taken the top position. That doesn't matter. The gap is not very significant. But let me take you through one case study to articulate what I'm trying to say. And therefore, that should not really matter. And where is this? 1 second.
I think your screen sharing has stopped.
I am just trying to just figure that out. 1 second.
You can click on the top presentation thing. I think that.
No, and I don't know why it stopped. Just 1 second. Can you see it?
No.
1 second.
You may do it again. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just doing it. Technology, the more you use it, the more it breeds contempt. That is the problem. So familiarity breeds contempt is so true even for technology sometimes. Now is it visible?
Better. Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So what I was trying to tell you is I want to take you through one case study. There are many case studies, of course, but I want to, quickly go on to the outlook, because this all is past that you're seeing, which looks very nice and beautiful. Look at this. I'll come to Goodman in a bit. I want to take you through Mapletree because that's a Singapore listing. Now look at Mapletree. There are 2-3 very important things in this crowded slide that I want to bring to your attention. First of all, Mapletree Logistics, yes, it is Singapore's first Asia-focused logistics REIT. So it is listed on the Singapore Stock Exchange. As we speak, there are close to 150 properties which Mapletree owns. But what is very, very important is it's a diversified portfolio. So the locations are in income generating assets in not only Singapore, but also in Hong Kong, in Japan, in China, in Australia, and South Korea, in Malaysia, Vietnam, all of these. The REITs is listed in Singapore. So what happens is that each of these assets, wherever they are leased out, are actually contributing to income, and that is basis which the Singapore REITs, which is the Mapletree Logistics, actually trades. So that is point number one. So just don't get carried away by looking at Singapore. Singapore is the hub for listing. Second and most important attention I want to draw you to is this brown graph. If you see in this graph, the brown shaded part, that is the DPU, or the dividend per unit. Very, very important yardstick for a portfolio manager when he or she is evaluating ki yaar ye REIT mein paise lagane hai ki nahi. And there, if you see, even through COVID, this is October, this will get updated for you till December in the next few days. But even into November, December, the dividend per unit from this REIT has remained constant. It has not plummeted. So that again is telling you that COVID or no COVID, these were anyway poised to perform. But yes, it has taken a small setback. Otherwise, this graph would have looked slightly better. But it has taken a setback only because of psychological. There was a massive lockdown in the first 2-3 parts of the year, etc. And that is the reason we have seen some sort of a stalling. Likewise, if you see the Goodman Group REITs, which is again largely industrial property. You know, Goodman Group is a developer into industrial properties, a lot of logistics facilities, business parks, all of that. And it also manages the entire property portfolio. Now, this is managed out of Australia, but it is conducting its business not only in Australia, but also in Japan, US, and Europe, across 400 properties, or 390 or 92 odd kind of a number. Now, the Amazon's new fulfillment center, for example, Goodman is actually going to provide the largest warehouse to them. So I'm saying, look at these, and Goodman, Amazon has been a Goodman client for the past 18 years, not 1, 2, 3, 4 years. And again, here I'll draw your attention to the brown shaded part, which is the dividend per unit. Look at the dividend per unit. It's pretty rock solid. And herein lies my 2020 thoughts and 2021. I will quickly move to 2021 before we open up for Q&A. 2020, office spaces, real estate or rental yields have shown a deceleration. But every other, residential is broadly flattish, maybe marginally down. But every other entity, the dividend yields have actually seen an escalation, marginal escalation of 1 to 2%. And which is where we draw our comfort, saying that this is where we believe that the year 2021 belongs to probably among other asset classes also belongs to REITs, because you are at the turning point or the cusp where we are at the phase of the introduction of the vaccine. And when you are at that phase, obviously we are looking at a case in point where we are saying that, look, the discretionary spends are going to rise, investors are, the consumers are going out, they are spending more. Let me take the case of Singapore. You know, I'll just start with Singapore. If you see, and the government of Singapore has actually started the phase 3 of reopening, which just started late last month, so towards the end of December. Now that is extremely positive for commercial facilities, because you know now they are saying that from 2 or 4, now 8 people are allowed for social gatherings, and even the attendance rate has been increased, because earlier it was below 50%. Also, you know that the vaccination process is already underway in Singapore. They are using the Pfizer vaccine, and their outlook, or the Singapore government view is that, including the foreign residents, they hope to complete that entire vaccination drive by Q3, which is third quarter. It's not impossible, because you know what the population of Singapore, including the expats, is. If you look at growth outlook, there is a 5.5% growth outlook expectation, which was a negative 6% in 2020. And obviously it's led by the manufacturing sector. So I think, therefore, there is a huge digital rebound expectation. There is a good expectation of the commercial and hospitality sector looking up. More and more property acquisition by the industrial sector picking up. And if you look at this period so far, the Singapore REIT, or most of the Singapore listed REITs have been outperforming the other markets, despite the fact that there has been a near-term rise in interest rates. And this is a trend which even the portfolio team at SMAM is expecting to continue well into 2021. And if you look at the top portfolio picks in that space, these names will be now very familiar to you. And I will share with you some sell side reports also, which will give you higher conviction if you want to do some more data crunching. So Mapletree I shared with you is an important, beneficiary of this. There's a Fraser Center Point also, which is part of top 10, as part of this portfolio. And Mapletree Logistics and Mapletree Industrial Trust both are continuing, even as we speak right now, invest in logistics and warehouses globally. Reopening of border, I think that will obviously add more and more, because there'll be international conventions, conferences, but that I would say probably towards the second half, not really in the immediate. One big risk to all this, I must warn you, is, as we saw in the performance slide also, if there is a sharp spike in interest rate. But as we speak right now, these REITs are performing despite the fact that interest rates have inched up in some parts of the world, including the US. So I think that's what, is an expectation. The fund right now is also looking at the hospitality segment. Hospitality underweight, completely zero, to start looking at some, because there is an expectation if all across the globe, if the economic activity picks up, obviously hospitality sector is likely to do well. Similar is the trend with the next highest holding in the portfolio, which is Australia. Now there again, firstly, you have the huge series of lockdown, which is why in Australia, while the infection, etc., is controlled, it is still fully yet to open up. But there, the portfolio manager is actually doing a barbell, like we do in fixed income. The barbell strategy is basically hold some value rates and some bit of growth rates. That is what the portfolio manager believes that will work probably in 2021. And they are also hopeful that there could be some REIT price appreciation, because towards the fag end of the year, as value stock morphs itself into growth, you'll actually see some re-rating. Here again, the key holding that they have is the Goodman Group, which I explained. Apart from that, they also have the Stockton Group and the Mirvac Group. Again, these are very two formidable names. I have each of these sell side links. We are adding some of these as part of our presentation also, which is important for you to really go through. Only to summarize and conclude, I would say that there is a growth plus and yield aspiration blended together. Additionally, for the Indian investor, what he or she gets is exposure to each of these underlying currencies. So as the rupee depreciates vis-a-vis each of these currencies, that also adds value to your fund performance. But as I say, and that is the reason, when we launched the fund, the currency was actually appreciating. So it made a sweet spot for us from a currency perspective. So for as investors, as you are concerned, there are three legs to returns. One is the dividend yield, which is in the band of 4 to 4.5%. Second is the currency appreciation will reduce your returns. Depreciation in currency will improve your returns. And the third leg is the capital gains or capital loss, which will accrue to you on account of the portfolio gain and up and down. We believe that the currency on a block of 3 years is likely to depreciate, and therefore the near-term appreciation is a good entry point from an investor standpoint. Volatilities will remain. You have three-way volatility. The dividend yields can fluctuate, but that's not very high. Currency can fluctuate. We know it's very live and real, and the underlying units can move up and down. So that is going to be the order of the day. So definitely for somebody who is looking to supplement fixed income portfolios, not very happy with very low returns, and is saying that equity jitna volatility nahi chahiye, this is a cusp of the two in the form of the REIT that we have just spoken about. So Tarun, I will pause here, and I'm happy to indulge in any queries.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Lakshmi. Lakshmi, what we have observed is non-correlated asset classes in a portfolio always help you make more long-term wealth. That's what the mantra is, and we have seen that time and again. 2020 was a gold year. 2021 is turning out to be an equity year. So real estate, we don't have, Indians are actually very, very bullish on real estate. Anyone you talk about is talking about, and when as a financial planner, whenever I see their net worth, 60 to 80% of their net worth is in real estate. Is it the same in the developed market also, or you see the pattern is different? Because financialization of real estate is what we have seen happening there. So what is the trend you see coming, let's say in a 5-year, 10-year, uh, uh, compared to what happened in the developed markets in India?
No, so in the developed world, while there is ownership of real estate, there is significantly high ownership of equities also. So there the
Right.
household participates through ETFs, and you see a lot of participation in financial asset classes, and gold or real estate actually takes a second seat or a second fiddle. Whereas contrary to that, in India, what we actually see is the overwhelming portion of an average Indian household is actually into traditional mode of investments, which they very conveniently misconstrue as doing fixed income, which is in some sense. Then it is gold, real estate, and then whatever is remaining is actually going into equities. As we are morphing ourselves in terms of thought process over the next 5 to 10 years, it is a very long period to really give you a clear cut view. But I think some of the investor behavior is showing that the participation of wealth creators, which is largely equities, is going to increase. So I won't say it will become a cult, but clearly the millennials today, as they enter into the working population, realize that purely by being in traditional banking strategies may not really accrue that kind of returns that probably their predecessors have achieved, and maybe the financial awareness is making them more and more want and aspire for other asset classes outside of just real estate and gold. Also, as I said, if you just look at specifically the ownership pattern of the India REITs, I'm doing this because it's the closest next to real estate. You see a nice and voracious appetite across fraternity to own that as an asset class, which is actually an hybrid asset. Which is actually an hybrid asset class. It's not fixed income, it's not equity, it's actually a combination. So as you grow more, as financial literacy starts picking up much more across our country also. In fact, India, even in the Asian counterparts, has got least ownership in equities, for example, and one of the higher ownerships in gold and real estate. I think that trend might probably move itself. So, you could see a couple of trends. One is pure traditional mode investors moving towards indexing. So that could be one trend. Second is physical real estate owners could move towards REITs. It could be India, non-India, that is completely a function of what they want, but I'm just giving you broader trends. And you'll also see some money probably weaning out of gold, because it's not that gold has not done returns, but what has happened is that there is an overwhelming weightage unknowingly also which some of the portfolios have towards gold. So known allocation is different. Unknown allocation or subconscious allocation, as we call it, is very significant. So I think some of those trends probably might change in the coming years.
So when we were talking about real estate, one memory which comes to my mind is in say 40 years before, Samundra Mahal property, which is one of the most marquee property in Mumbai, it used to cost, let's say, 15,000 rupees per square feet. As we talk, it is let's say at 1 lakh per square feet. But when I look at a CAGR return, and that's where most of the real estate investors miss out, they talk very absolute number when they talk real estate. कि मैंने 50 लाख डाला था, वो आज 2 करोड़ हो गया. But it has happened in 40 years, 50 years. The CAGR return continues to be 12-13%. And that is one very missing factor. And do you see that with this REITs coming in, this will address a lot of challenges, and it gives a financialization of real estate, which is one of the big problem. I see today a lot of investors are stuck in properties. They made investments. Today they want to sell, but they are not able to sell. So where do you see the liquidity moving in this REIT part? Because that is one challenge with most of the real estate investors are grappling with.
So I think, the REIT kind of a concept attacks exactly these two issues that you mentioned, Tarun. One is it allows for monetization at the developer level. So that is point number one. And second is, in your own terminology, and I completely agree, it allows for the financialization of real estate or liquefaction of real estate. What happens is that we all know that you can live in your house, but the moment you try to trade your house, the way you trade equities, it's next to impossible, the pace at which it happens, etc. So real estate is definitely one of the more illiquid asset classes, or as they call it, physical. Therefore, it's part of a physical asset, not financial asset. So REIT, therefore, is, I would say, a one-stop solution to all those who love real estate, don't really want to give up that. I also want to share with you that we see this incremental trend that, you're aware of the liberalized remittance route, where LRS route, where you and me and all of us are allowed to wire money outside the country into various asset classes, including equity, real estate, everything. Quite a bit of them are actually buying real estate. Some of them might be buying, obviously, for their kids' education, future, etc. But we see a good amount of interest being generated even to buy real estate for investments. And I think for all those kind of monies also, I would say that REIT is a solution. Now, same thing can be in India. Somebody can buy a holiday home, and I know one can argue, yaar, REIT unit hota hai, usme thodi reh sakte hain, ghar mein to hum rahenge. But ghar mein kitne rahoge? Ek ghar mein ek time pe rahoge. You cannot be staying in all your multiple houses at the same point in time. So REITs is therefore an answer to those who believe in real estate as an investment, but unfortunately are baffled by the illiquidity that it can offer. Even more troublesome is the fact that you don't own properties, you actually own land. That is like the mother of all evils or troubles, where you realize that there is this, a lot of problems with land being encumbered, unencumbered. Somebody could be having agricultural land, it could be disputed. And I don't need to look elsewhere. I just need to scan my own coterie of friends and family, and I find so many of them who are stuck in disputes and are not able to resolve. So I think for all those, investors and potential real estate seekers, I would say REIT is definitely an idea whose time has come. This CAGRization, or the absolute talk that real estate does, and I completely relate to this. I was in Surat addressing an audience of doctors, and this is 2 years back. So we are talking about doctors. Even most of them, their income is in cash. Very few of them now, so most of them have moved towards electronic means, and pre-demonetization, it was even much more. So the only thing that they can relate to is which asset classes can be bought in cash, and real estate is clearly one of them. So through my presentation, where I was talking about asset allocation, one of the doctors actually told me same thing. Valsad mein land liya tha, iska itna ho gaya, to mera paisa double ho gaya. And I kept asking him, sir, double hua matlab kitna hua? And he said, nahi, double hua, itna ka itna. Then I drew it on Excel sheet and I showed him that even the worst performing equity fund in your period, aapne kuch nahi, aapne sirf aise hi bol diya, that equity fund was the worst performing. Even that fund has outperformed your land value. And that was a shocker or an eye opener. So, I think the solution to all that, I'm not saying don't own real estate. Are there smarter means to own real estate? Answer is yes.
Yeah, average investor doesn't have the access to buy, let's say, the cream properties. They always will end up buying something which may not be. There are a lot of title issues, so many issues, right? So which particularly ends up in low wealth creation for them, right? So one more question is on the suitability part. And I think we always look at suitability, what is suitable for investor. So what's your sense for whom this product is suitable? Is it suitable? Normal REITs, are they suitable for somebody debt plus kind of investor, equity minus kind of investor? How should one look at, and what is the expectation they need to build up? Because I can see in the bad times, there were the data you were sharing for this particular REIT, Kotak is doing. From 10 years, I think 2 years were like low or the flat returns kind of years. So what should be the time horizon one should look at investing?
To answer to your first point, any REIT investment, whether it is this fund or any other individual REIT that you want to own, has to be a debt plus equity minus in terms of volatility expectation, in terms of return expectation, all of that, because it is actually a cusp between a rental income, which is a steady state annuity, vis-a-vis a potential for capital appreciation, depending on the underlying metrics. And therefore, if you see, the embedded volatility is certainly higher than fixed income, but lower than equity. And I think that is how the positioning should be. If you're looking at whether REITs in India individually, as I said, you don't have too many choices. Or if you want to choose to diversify outside of India on your own through this fund, you have multiple ways. We are only facilitators of something which is available as an add-on. If you do it through a mutual fund route, like a fund like this, it has to be for 3 years at least. Why I say that is because it has a debt taxation. Any fund which does not invest minimum 65% in Indian equities qualifies as a debt taxation, which means LTCG is 3 years and beyond. A, from that perspective, and B, as I said, one bad year, like the COVID year, while the returns have been positive, it could be suboptimal positive. But over a 3-year period, it tends to normalize. So what we also did, Tarun, is we actually did a rolling return, of this fund. It's almost as a 10-year track record in the Asia REIT space. So we did a rolling return analysis. What I showed you was calendar returns, and one could say, I don't come in Jan, I don't exit in December. So at any point in time that you came into the fund in the last 11 years or 10 years for a block of 3 years, the fund rolling returns actually suggested it's never given a negative return. But if you came in for a period of 1 year, any time in the last 10 years, there were 12% instances where the fund actually gave negative return. So, okay. Looking at all that, it's clearly evident that it makes a lot of sense. It may be very incidental that you may make money in the next 12 months, but there is also currency play which is there. Right now, the currency in India is appreciating, but yeah, over a period of time, there will be vulnerabilities and volatilities. So I think 3 years could be an appropriate period for funds or structures like these.
So I think with that, another question which comes to our mind is, are they REIT safe investment in the recession period? Whenever an economy is going through a slowdown, how do you see, based on your experience, the REITs will play out? That is one. And second is, how is the REIT market developing in India? Because it's normally basically an office market. I can see both the REITs available in India is a majorly office as well as hospitality oriented REITs available. And which it was an eye-opener to me when you showed me the diversification which this current REIT is offering. It has all the industrial, retail, diversified assets. So where do you see this happening in India? Do you see this market developing in India also? So that currency risk goes away. Indians can invest in their own country REITs.
Yeah, no, so I'll tell you a couple of things, India versus rest of the world, and then I'll come to your specific point on diversification also. Is that in terms of a recession, first point is that India, if you look at the developer background, especially the ones with huge land parcels which are waiting to monetize, bulk of them are in the office spaces. So for the foreseeable future, we don't really see any huge diversification being available in the India space. And even if they were, they would be all, very small scale. It would not be a large scale. If you look at the market cap of Embassy, which is the listed REIT available today, it's close to 27,000 crores. But if you look at the average market cap of the REITs that this portfolio has, where we have all the entire Asia and the Pacific region, that is close to $6 billion, which is close to 50,000 crores. That's the average market cap. So what I'm trying to tell you is that in terms of India versus the rest of the world, I think India still will continue to be patronizing office spaces, and they'll be far too few in number. So diversification, if one you have to own either funds or strategies with an intent of having non-India ownership because of the diversification. On your second point, yeah, but if one says that no, I don't want diversification, I'm okay with only office spaces, then one has to run the risk of vulnerabilities, volatilities, all of that, because it's a single underlying asset risk. So that's number one.
Lakshmi, since you just touched upon that point, office, how do you see, because anybody who's looking at India REITs has to go to office. You see this COVID, any data you have, any insights that COVID has brought in a lot of pressure on offices, commercial properties, or do you see it smoothing down in the coming quarter?
Tarun, the data is very mixed. It is not that all offices have closed down lock, stock, and barrel and said that, oh, now it's only going to be live from home. That's not the case. And it's not that everybody has said that, okay, now starting Jan 1st, everybody has to come to office. So the data is giving very mixed signals. Some of them continue to work from home and say that this is going to be the new world order. And those kind of people will actually see some of the office spaces actually being given up. Some of them will be the hybrid model, which entities like us probably will adopt, which will be 60-40, 70-30 kind of thing. So maybe 20-30% of the office spaces will be completely given up. So it is a mixed space. So far, in the REITs in India that we are tracking, the occupancy levels continue to be reasonably strong. There is no underlying entity which has actually given up, but to be fair, these are all high, I would say metro locations like Bombay, Bangalore, Delhi, Chennai. So these are those kind of locations, and therefore the occupancy level continues to be pretty strong. That is the experience that we have while seeing the current REITs which are listed on the Indian space. But how this is going to evolve going forward, we do not know. But so far, we've not really seen, of course, the price points have corrected. If you see the listed REITs from where they were on their peak levels to where they are right now, there has been a very sharp correction, which is why the previous issuance which happened at a small discount to the market price then. So I think there will be no one size fits all. It depends on what is the underlying nature of the business. I have been working from home now in another month and a half. It will be almost a year that I've been working from home, part of financial services. It's not really been a showstopper, but for those who are in the manufacturing sector, probably after June, July, most of them were, actually working from their offices. So I think it's a very mixed bag. We've not really seen, let me put it this way, at least from the numbers that we are tracking in India, especially with respect to REITs, so far we have not seen any adverse impact. Pricing is demonstrating that there could be probable deterioration, but I don't know. I don't want to read too much into that. With respect to how REITs do in the times of recession, recession is a period where interest rates are exceedingly low. There is a lot of effort and energy being pumped by various central bankers to actually prime the economy. And when things like that happen, you actually start seeing REITs do exceedingly well because interest rates are a very key driver. Conversely, when you see a sharp spike in interest rates, REITs tend to underperform. But why they underperform? Because higher interest rates, which means, risk asset classes will do slightly better, and therefore the valuations tend to take a beating. But when the underlying rental yields start improving, that is when you start seeing these high interest rates leading to improved, I would say, capacity levels, and that starts showing into valuations. So abrupt rise in interest rates is immediately negative from a REIT standpoint. Gradual rise in interest rates is absolutely okay. Recessionary trends tend to benefit positively because you see sharp slides in interest rates. And I think that is the one, that's the phase that we have seen through bulk of 2020. It was almost, most of the countries had formally gone into recession, and which is why you saw underperformance as far as REITs is concerned. on a relative basis, but of course on absolute terms, the returns were clearly positive.
I think I couldn't help myself asking this question because you manage a large asset in the debt side. So, what's your view on the interest rates, Lakshmi? Because we can see a lot of activity happening, and there is an artificial stimulus which is happening across the globe, most central banks. So, as you mentioned, recession, we are in a, from an interest rate point of view, we are in a very softer interest rate environment. And that's my observation. Whenever the real interest rates are in this kind of state and negative real interest rates are there, the real assets like equity and real estate will do very well. So what's your take on interest rates going forward, say 1 year, 3 year? Any insights you can share with us?
So clearly, if 2020 was the year of the virus, 2021 seems to be the year of the vaccine. So there is a hope which is getting built up, and central bankers, which actually have created excesses in terms of liquidity across the globe, will actually have to start looking at normalizing this liquidity. We've already started seeing those trends underway, even in India, where our central bankers have started announcing longer term liquidity drain out measures, while it's not a permanent drain out of liquidity. So I think therein lies our view, where we are expecting bulk of the normalization to happen first on the liquidity front, and maybe towards the end of 2021, it actually paves way for slightly higher interest rates. In that interim, at least in India, probably we could see the reverse repo being inched up first. So, because let's not forget, even if 2 lakh crores goes out, you're still in a surplus liquidity scenario. Even if CRR cut gets unwound by March, April, you're still in a surplus liquidity scenario. Yes, the surplus is reducing, but it is not going into deficit. So I think the reverse repo corridor, repo is the benchmark rate, reverse repo is the rate at which RBI borrows. We see that gradually inching up. So a gradual upward movement in interest rates is something which could be on the cards. But as I said, I don't think any central banker, including our central banker, will be in a tearing hurry to say, yaar, ab sab kuch ho gaya hai, chalo rates badhne hi chahiye. That's not going to be the case, because you look at the rest of the world, the problems are still far from over. Germany has announced a 14-day lockdown. Canada was in a lockdown. Israel, despite vaccination, the responses are fairly mixed. UK, we all know what the story is. US, I don't know what's happening, but some people say that, by March, and again, these are reports that you're reading, not that I'm a pandemic expert. It says that by March, there can be a mutant strain which will go there. So I'm saying there are mixed feelers which are coming across the globe. So it's better that the central bankers will err on the side of caution rather than they are anti and say that now everything is finally settling in, so let's go for the jump. With respect to real estate, we are seeing residential real estate do better compared to office spaces in India because obviously of stamp duty cut, etc. Similar is the case that we are seeing in some other parts also, where demand for residential, as work from home becomes the norm and interest rates are exceedingly low, where mortgage rates are available at absolutely dirt cheap or affordable levels. Even for India, you're getting it 6.7%. There is a tendency to own studio apartments, affordable, spaces. So residential spaces, the view is slightly more positive than office spaces.
So Lakshmi, if I have to tell you, I am an investor who has a 4-year view. I am a relatively aggressive investor. And I know today the debt interest rates, a 1-year FD in State Bank of India is less than 4.5%. In this environment, and if I have to manage my portfolio, say, it's a very basic question which most of the people ask. So from an overweight point of view, underweight point of view, and I think coming from a debt fund manager would be very good for us to know how should we get our money parked in this environment. Maybe some REIT allocation also should be part of it. But what would you say? How should it be planned?
So my vote always, and I am very old-fashioned when it comes to asset allocation because that's worked well for me. I don't see any reason why it can't work well for any of us. It's that your bulk of your allocations, depending on your risk appetite, should be in the favor of equities and fixed income, depending on what is your motive, wealth stability or wealth growth. If wealth growth is your motive, then you are obviously overweight equities, and vice versa if it's wealth stability. The tail end allocation, which is anywhere ranging from 5 to 15%, should always be allocated to combination of offshore asset class, gold, REITs. You can name whatever you like. You can bunch in a few of these strategies. That should always be a 5 to 15% allocation, depending on what suits you and how much of the availability. If you're very, very conservative, you are having an overwhelming portion of your money in fixed income. Still, I would say 5 to 7% into a REIT or any of these, or gold. Gold, of course, should be definitely part of your portfolio, even if you are very conservative, at least 5%. My problem is I see people owning 30, 40, 50% gold and say they are conservative investors. So it kind of beats my logic. So even if you are a very conservative investor, I think whether you're owning gold or you're owning offshore equities or you're owning REITs, have it in the band of 5 to 15%. Max push it if you're saying that, my risk profile allows me to take some more volatility, push it up to 20%. I don't see any of these categories really being an integral part of the portfolio. I still believe for the foreseeable future, for the next decade or so, it is going to be EM as a pack or emerging as a pack that will rule roost. And in that, obviously, India has a very formidable mention as far as wealth creation potential is concerned. So I think the overwhelming portion should be definitely allocated between Indian equities and fixed income. The proportion is, of course, completely your prerogative depending on your risk appetite. And these are actually tail-ended allocations.
I think we have some attendees question coming in. So Ajita is asking, does the capital appreciation come from the share price or from some benchmark for revision of the valuation of underlying property? That gets us to the valuation methodology, right? So the industrial properties you are talking about, who values them and how real that is, and can one believe those valuations? Because we have seen a lot of such audit issues happening globally. So yeah.
Valuation definitely happens for each of these underlying properties, but the REIT does not own any of these properties. So the capital appreciation actually comes in obviously from the share price, point number one, based on what the entity is going to be doing, or what kind of flows or cash flow improvement, or what kind of rent escalation he or she is able to command in that time period for the next 3 to 5 years. Most of these industrial leases are for a period of 3 to 5 years. Office spaces are more like 3-4 years. Industrial spaces are more like 4 to 5 years. So at that point in time, how much extra rental yield or rental negotiation that the underlying REIT is able to get, that's the asset for the REIT. That is the driver of the what happens to the underlying plot. They obviously is more of the developer's headache, not really the REIT's headache. But yes, they also do get value from time to time. But the real value unlocking or the valuation metrics, and if you have to assign, if a fund manager is assigning value, they will actually assign it to the future cash flow potential that this underlying asset can actually generate over time.
Great. Another important question from Mr. Jagmohan Sharma: what is the benchmark to evaluate the return on REIT, and what's the kicker into it? So I think how do you compare that this REIT is performing well or not?
So there is a benchmark for the fund, of course. That also is a basket of REITs only. So that is obviously the closest comparison. But hybrid strategies don't really have any comparison metrics because you have to broadly evaluate from 2-3 perspectives. One is it acting as an effective diversifier, which is where the correlation coefficient comes in. These underlying REITs, if you see, are not very highly correlated with equities. And therefore, the correlation is, I think, 0.5 or 0.5 0.55 or something. So given that the correlations are not very high, it acts as a reasonable diversifier into your portfolio. And the question, one can ask is, today, the REITs that are listed in India, what are you comparing? Are you comparing it with the Nifty index? Are you comparing it with a fixed income 10-year yield? Both are right and both could be wrong. So that is the reason a hybrid approach is, something which is more relevant. Over a 3-year period, does this have the potential to outperform a fixed income investment? The answer is yes. Can it be so voracious that it can do better than equity? My suspect is probably not. I might be proven wrong subsequently. That's a different thing.
Great.
And the kicker, so this is, as I said, the kicker is clearly the capital appreciation. If you see the past, at least for the REITs that we evaluated, because we were evaluating this fund, 60% came in from capital appreciation and 40% was attributable to currency depreciation.
So another question coming in from Mr. Dalal, can you make some correlation between your REITs return and currency appreciation or depreciation?
So currency depreciation adds to the return and currency appreciation will deduct from the return. So that is the correlation that you can draw. So in years where we've seen an appreciating currency, which is the INR appreciating, it tends to drag on the return of the REITs. Because our fund, in India is going to be rupee denominated. So it's rupee in, rupee out. But the rupee is actually going and taking exposure to the Aussie dollar, to the Sing dollar, to the Hong Kong dollar, and likewise. So every time the rupee depreciates from the point you have entered, that can get added on to your return as an add-on.
So we have most of the questions addressed. Lakshmi, I think I'm coming to another very important 2 questions. And the second last question which I want to ask is the important, and this is a little off the topic question, importance of behavior in investing. And we always want to ask the expert whosoever comes every month here, because I see investing is all about your behavior and it is not related with the markets. Things which you can control, you should do that, right? And behavior is something which we can control. Can you share something about maybe your investing pattern or what you have observed? What are the mistakes people make? And maybe some mantras you want to share with them, that how can this wealth creation or the secret sauce available for them?
No, so I have no secret sauce. I'm telling you, I'm an extremely old-fashioned investor. I have some allocation into gold. I put some money into REITs. I have my SIPs which have been going on, and trust me, I have not seen my SIP returns even right now. Of course, when I'm filing my tax returns at the end of the year, when I have to give my data or my documents, that is the only time I see it. And I literally walk the talk, because I think the biggest enemy of wealth creation is not the market. It is our own mentality, which is greed and fear. We often get driven by greed and fear, and that has been the biggest doomsday recipe as far as our there is always, the tendency to book profit. यार बाजार चढ़ रहा है, profit book कर लो, अब यहाँ से निकलना है. Profit booking is okay if your end objective is met. Profit booking is okay that you had a goal and this goal is met and now I need this money for XYZ reason. But volatility is our friend and we have to befriend volatility. We cannot run away from volatility. I think that is very, very important. Enough and more volumes have been written, as a mutual fund industry, again, it might sound very cliche, but there are mechanisms to help you cope with volatility, which is STP, Systematic Transfer Plan, or SIP. I fail to understand why SIPs cease when the markets are actually trending lower. When the markets are trending lower, your same money is actually buying you more units. So, we have actually seen examples how when the investor at the bottom, we just took random time periods, he made X return, and when he stopped the SIP, and when that other person actually had continued with his SIP, the return would have been X plus 6, X plus 7, X plus 8. So, or you're stopping SIP when the market hits the peak. So I think these are all behaviors which I would strongly urge investors to please stay away from. Your advisor is your friend, your philosopher, your guide. They know everything the way our general physician knows about our physical health. So I think it's very important to discuss financial health with the advisor, and take it forward from there. I think that's very, very important. Otherwise, investments are very easy. It's not at all cumbersome. We make it very, very complex. And trust me, Tarun, I'm no expert. It's as I said, it's more uh, we spend bulk of our times in the market. I have two calls after this also. So we are only eating, drinking, and breathing all of this, and therefore the processing pace of information that we assimilate is reasonably faster, and therefore we are able to take those investment decisions. And given that kind of a thing, you've seen all of this. If you would have asked me yesterday or day before yesterday that will's index touch near 15,000 or Sensex be at 50,000, I said I don't know. Or will you see a downward movement first and then an upward? I think anything can happen, because it's market, and markets don't get governed by your and my mood. Market has got a might of its own, and as for all those who have seen the movie Scam, Ba Bhagwan Che, you have to just respect the price. That is so very important. So we do our karma. Let market do its dharma. No, we are doing our karma, and our karma is in our control, is what I believe.
Great. Another last question, I think, coming is the India REIT or offshore REIT from legal, tax, and return perspective. I think you already touched upon, but maybe you want to give a quick bite on that.
So, as I said, it is not either or. You look at two, three things. One is if you want to own REIT and only in India, then nobody can stop you. But you have to compare rental yields available in India vis-a-vis government bond yields. What is the gap? The gaps right now are not very significant. Vis-a-vis a diversifier opportunity which is available for you outside of India. So they are not really strictly comparable. But if you want to have a true to label diversifier, I showed that to you in the first slide itself. India will, for the foreseeable future, just offer you, at least right now, they're offering you only office spaces. From a tax perspective, I'm not a tax expert, but I can tell you a 3-year holding for a fund like this will be a debt taxation qualifying for indexation benefits. There is no other legal aspect, at least that I am aware of.
Great, great. So, Lakshmi, I think on that note, we always ask our panelists to share something about their life journey and what keeps driving you on what is your inspiring quote which keeps you moving. Again, off topic, I can see you again started from I think 20 years back into asset management industry, and as we speak, you are managing more than 1 lakh crore of assets in Kotak. So I think what is that one thing which keeps driving you on a daily basis? I think something inspiring for all of us.
So two things. One is, I think on the professional front, it is there is a lot of dynamism in the market, so that keeps you occupied, keeps you on tenterhooks. There is no day which is similar to the other day. So it's always something exciting. So you don't need to do bungee jumping. Market gives you enough bungee opportunities. And for me, I am very motivated by Bollywood. I draw a lot of inspiration because A, it allows you to break the clutter from the financial markets, and B, investors, I'm able to relate to with a lot of Bollywood because for me, life itself is, a high. For teetotalers, that's what matters. When you don't have other high octane spirits to lift your spirits, then it is only all of these that keep your spirits and tempo high. And for me, it's always live life king size. It doesn't matter your gender is a queen, but you have to live life king size. So I think these are the key drivers which keep you sane even in these kind of mundane markets. And exercise a lot. I believe in exercising. It could be any form. Even if you walk up and down your house 10 times, I think it's very important because COVID has taught how important is your mental health and physical health. And now I can say I can even add digital health. So I think if you want to maintain all of that, exercising is must. So don't try to exercise your portfolio. I see people exercising their portfolio by churning it a lot. But when it comes to exercising their own body, they try to keep away. So try to reverse roles and you see the benefits. It can be wonderful.
Thank you, Lakshmi. Thank you so much for your time and all these insightful data and information and your insights. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much.
Arun, take care, and all of you stay safe and stay invested. Bye. See you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.